I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, I'm Tom Lochner, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We're excited to be a partner with Extension to bring you research-backed resources, tools, and tips to keep Wisconsin marshes productive and profitable.
Stop being able to say good morning and now have to say good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to our first virtual brown bag of the 2022 growing season. As you all know, we like to spend the growing season focusing on agronomic topics, but in this off season we like to be able to bring in a few experts to consult with us on business management parts of the cranberry growing world. And so Jim Versweyveld is a colleague of mine from Extension. He's the farm management outreach specialist and is going to be talking with us today on navigating labor shortages. I want to give a couple of housekeeping updates. So do feel welcome to ask questions either by unmuting yourself and asking directly or by typing the question into the chat over the course of the session. Turn on your transcripts if you like to see the words going by on the screen as we go. And those are in the ellipsis part of your menu, the dots, and then view transcript. Want to remind you to ask questions, and I also want to thank the Growers Association for helping to host these. The education committee there helps determine topics, and I always am very grateful for their suggestions, and we try to bring in the people that the growers are excited to hear from. So I'm going to hand things over to Tom Lochner for a quick thank you for the Growers Association and welcome.
Well, thanks, Allison, and thank you everybody for joining us over the noon hour today. I know it's a busy time. I know there's a lot of sand going down and people are busy on it, but hopefully the people that join us today find benefit to our monthly brown bag session, and then hopefully we'll have more people on Friday when it's rebroadcast. I want to thank Allison, Alex for setting this up and managing this along with the education committee, and also thank Jim for joining us this noon to present on a topic I think that's near and dear to everybody's heart. I mean, I read an article this morning in the paper that 90% of the businesses in the state are experiencing workforce shortages and have needs. So it's pretty timely on that. Just a couple of things for folks. On February 22nd, the WSCGA board will be meeting in their annual planning session. We're going to do some strategic planning for the next 2 to 3 years on our core program areas. We're also going to be appointing committees. So if anybody's interested in serving on a committee, contact the office or Stephen Bartling, who's the board president. And then on March 16th, we will be holding the Wisconsin Cranberry Board's annual budget meeting, and that will be at the research station. And if anybody's interested, they can stop over on the morning of the 16th and hear the presentations for proposals and also the results of previous funded proposals, and then also the board's deliberation on establishing its budget for the upcoming year. So with that, again, thanks everybody for joining this morning or this afternoon, and I'll turn it back over to Allison to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Tom, and of course, thank you to the Growers Association as always. So Jim Versweyveld, the Farm Management Outreach Specialist. I'm really lucky at the Division of Extension to be able to connect with friendly and knowledgeable people, especially in the areas that are, as Tom mentioned, really key importance and sometimes outside of the realm that I feel most skilled at. So I'm very glad that Jim will be here to be able to describe how to navigate a labor shortage. Good people are very, very important. And I guess I will let Jim dive into his presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But thank you for joining us, the cranberry growers, today, and we're all grateful for your knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Allison, for that introduction. Thank you, cranberry growers, for including me in your brown bag series. I'm excited to share hopefully some tips that can help you navigate labor shortages for the upcoming growing season. There is not a silver bullet. I wish there was. If there was, I would happily share it with you, but hopefully some tips to improve your recruiting process and hopefully retention as well as we navigate through this. As Allison said, I am a farm management outreach specialist. I'm broadcasting from the extension office in Jefferson. That is my home office, although my position is statewide, and I'm focused on labor and safety. So no surprise to anyone on this program that we're faced with a growing worker shortage here in Wisconsin. The Wisconsin workforce is approaching full employment with an unemployment rate of around 3%. At 3% unemployment, basically everyone who wants to be working is working. They may not be in their dream job, but they're certainly gainfully employed. And so this makes it challenging for us to basically nab people from other employers as we move forward with our employment needs. We know that agriculture has some image problems when it comes to attracting workers. We are fully aware that working on farms can be challenging to attract people. When it's cold, it's cold. When it's hot, it's hot. The work is physically demanding, and the hours are often long. So workers may be more attracted to other sectors. And obviously, as you drive around town, everyone is hiring. There's signs in every window, so it's definitely a challenging market. There's also less availability of migrant agriculture worker. We've relied very heavily on migrant workers throughout agriculture, and that's a little bit challenging right now. The work visa process continues to be cumbersome and challenging to navigate for many employers, and COVID hasn't helped. In many cases, international travel is restricted. It definitely was, in the last year, but even today, we continue to see some restrictions as far as international travel. And then we also see a trend where Wisconsin rural workforce is aging out. So a lot of baby boomers leaving employment for their retirement years, and a trend that we're seeing with young people in our rural communities leaving for urban opportunities. And that's something that we've seen pretty consistently. Turnover continues to be a challenge as well. Turnover on farms is higher than other industry standards. So we see people leaving farm employment at a rate that's higher than other industries have seen. We know that turnover is expensive. The Society for HR Management estimates the average cost per new hire at $4,000. And that's not only the recruiting and the onboarding expenses, but the lost productivity of when you're faced with a vacancy on your team. We also know that effective HR practices are not in place on many of our farms in Wisconsin. And what I mean by effective HR practices are employee handbooks, formal recruiting and onboarding processes, performance reviews. So in many cases, these are kind of hit or miss with some of our farm employees. Another kind of hidden cost with employee turnover is the effect that it has on morale. So when we have a vacancy on our team, farms tend to never be overstaffed. So when we have a vacancy, it kind of raises the bar for everyone else on the team to work harder and longer. And that can wear on people. And then also kind of the psychological factor of people leaving your team, people quitting, it kind of makes you stop and wonder, wow, you know, everybody's bailing. Should I be looking for other opportunities as well? So employee turnover definitely takes a toll. COVID-19 has not helped. And I'd like to draw your attention for a moment to that chart on the right-hand side of my screen. These were the industries that were hit the hardest due to the pandemic. So the industries that had the most job disruptions, and you'll see that food and drink, retail, travel, tourism, and leisure were the industries that were hit the hardest with job loss during the pandemic. Unfortunately for farms, these jobs, food and drink, retail, travel, tourism, don't necessarily translate all that well to farm workers. So we haven't seen a lot of people leaving, say, hospitality related jobs to go work on a farm. And the industries that do translate well to farm workers, like construction, landscape, some of the outdoor trades, they actually kept quite busy during the pandemic. So they were less likely to provide any relief to the number of vacancies that we had on our farm. One other thing I'd like to just call your attention to quick on this chart, which I think is interesting, is in the darker red are the low wage jobs that were lost due to the pandemic and disruptions. And then the lighter pink color is the high wage jobs. So notice how disproportionate it was as far as the work and the workers that were disrupted by the pandemic. So what we see now, hopefully with the worst of the pandemic behind us, I hope, we see labor demand surging while the labor supply continues to lag. And some of that is caused by what I'll call pandemic-inspired job changes. I think the pandemic caused people to kind of pause for a moment and say, do I really like what I'm doing? You know, is this maybe an opportunity to look around while jobs are so plentiful and maybe explore some other alternative profession. Another thing that was very real for many workers was the upheaval in childcare. So schools were closed, childcare providers were closed. This created a huge upheaval for working parents. And I would argue that employers actually saw more upheaval from childcare issues than they actually saw from workers being out sick with the virus. So it was pretty far reaching. And then the other thing to know is that even though, you know, like I said, hopefully the worst of the pandemic is behind us, these labor challenges are probably long lasting and will last, you know, well into the upcoming years. So a lot of HR experts are calling 2021 the Great Resignation, where we saw people leave their jobs in record numbers that haven't been seen, you know, in recent years. So lots of people reinventing themselves, maybe taking a moment to kind of think about what they want to be when they grow up. And I guess that causes all employers, all businesses, not just farms, to really think about, you know, if you want good employees, be a good employer, because workers can be picky. There's many opportunities available to them and they can pick and choose. So it's on all of us as employers to kind of raise our game and maybe be better than we were in the past at being an employer of choice. So you need help on your farm. How do you find people? There's lots of different ways to do this. First and foremost is word of mouth. This is kind of the tried and true method that many farms have used for decades. 4 out of 5 farm managers find employees by word of mouth. Just letting those that you know that you have vacancies, and the people will hopefully show up. There is nothing wrong with recruiting via word of mouth, but my concern in this kind of labor market is, will it be enough? Will you have to try some other methods to try to fill out your team during this year's growing season? One thing I hope you'll consider is employee referrals. Employee referrals are just simply asking your team for help to find the people that you need. This is based on the premise that good people know good people. And I think this is true in many respects, that your talented team that works for you knows other talented people as well who may be potential employees. Should you offer those people a bonus for helping you find workers? Call it a finder's fee. And I think it's a great idea. I think whether it's $200, $500, whatever you decide makes sense for your business, I think it's a great way to encourage people to apply. If you use employee referrals and you plan to put bonuses in place, I would encourage you to put some type of time frame involved in that, so that you don't have people just showing up and leaving the next week. You paid out a bonus and the people are gone. So whether it makes sense to be 90 days or 6 months or whatever you think makes sense for your business, but I do think it's a valuable tool. Posting your employment opportunities in the local newspaper. That may work. If you're like me, the county shopper kind of goes right directly into the recycling bin. So how many people see those job postings is debatable. I do think that those newspapers that have an online classified section may get your ad out to a wider audience. So you can certainly consider those as well. I would encourage you to recruit through social media. If your farm has a Facebook page, that's a great way to get the word out that you're hiring. Twitter is another method that you can use. Social media. If your farm doesn't have a Facebook page, I would encourage you to do that. If you yourself feel uncomfortable setting that up, maybe somebody from your team or a family member may be more skilled in how to do that, but it's a great way. It's free of charge, and it's definitely a good way to get the word out. LinkedIn may be a method, although LinkedIn tends to appeal to more leadership level, more management type job seekers, but it certainly is a tool that's out there. Craigslist may be a way to find workers. Craigslist can be a little sketchy sometimes, but farmers use Craigslist, so it is a good way to reach that audience. But I would make sure that if you do that, if you use Craigslist, you may want to consider putting your ad on the farm-related page versus burying it with all the help wanted that all the other businesses are listing as well. There are other job sites that you might want to consider: Indeed, Career Builder, Monster. These are websites that job seekers use very frequently. Again, this sometimes appeals more to leadership level positions on your farm versus some of your hourly farm workers, but it's worth a try, and it's definitely an option for you as you seek workers. A question that I get often is, should I use a job application? And I would answer yes. I would encourage you to have a formal job application process. There's a few things that job applications can do for you. For one thing, quite simply, it can let you know if the candidate that's applying for a job with you can read and write. And you may say, well, the position I have doesn't require someone who can read and write. That's totally fine. But sometimes it's good as an employer to just know that about your employee. So I think it's a good idea to go through that process. It also gives you an opportunity to collect important contact information, as well as any previous employers or references that the person may have that you could check on. I would also encourage you, when you're recruiting, to leverage your network. And what I mean by that is any trusted consultants, any suppliers that you work with closely, let them know that you're hiring. They may know of other farms that maybe aren't hiring or are in some cases letting people go. And they may be, a good kind of conduit to let others know that you're hiring. I would encourage you to host 4-H or FFA events on your farm. these organizations, 4-H and FFA, are definitely changing. They're not necessarily clubs for farm kids anymore. Often 4-H and FFA members have a more urban or suburban upbringing, and they may be looking to opportunities on farms to get that experience that they need as they pursue vocations or avocations in agriculture. You could host a farm breakfast. These events, these community events, are a lot of work and difficult to navigate, but it definitely gets the community aware of your farm as a potential employer and can get the word out that you are, a viable place for people to seek employment. And then last but not least, I'd encourage you to hold a job fair. A job fair is simply an open house on your farm where you let maybe casual job seekers kind of see what your farm is about and what opportunities might exist. The nice opportunity for you with a job fair is if you spot a viable candidate that looks really, really promising, you can pull them aside and encourage them to fill out a job application right on the spot. On the flip side, if you spot somebody who maybe isn't such a desirable candidate, you can thank them for coming and wish them a nice day. So it's kind of a no stress way of recruiting for positions on your farm. When you're in the mode of recruiting, it's a great time to review your job descriptions. I'm fully aware that job descriptions on farms are sometimes either non-existent or they're tucked away in a binder somewhere, never to surface again. But I would encourage you to spend some time working on those job descriptions, because they not only can become your job posting for your vacancies, but they can also be a great source for interview questions as you formalize your interview process. If you don't have job descriptions on your farm and you would like to add some, we do have a tool on our Farm Management Topic Hub website that gives you a step-by-step guide to kind of walk you through developing job descriptions for your farm. So, I would encourage you to use that guide and be happy to help you find that if you have any trouble navigating to it. So you're ready to conduct interviews on your farm. Here's some steps that I would encourage you to take as you're conducting those interviews. First off, set the stage. And set the stage can be simple things like cleaning up the farmyard, making sure that your farm office isn't a terrible junky mess, so that you're ready and able to really focus on asking the job candidates valid questions and kind of listening to them, making sure that their experience is a positive one. I would encourage you to consider your first impressions, but be careful about that. So, and what I mean is, when we meet someone new, the first minute that we start to say hello, we start to form impressions or judge that individual. Those gut instincts that we develop about people are sometimes valid and sometimes very, very relevant as a hiring practice. But we all have biases that we've developed over the years about people. And so be careful about those biases and make sure that if you're developing biases about someone, that it's somehow related to the ability to actually do the job. We're all guilty of it. I can give you an example just from my own personal life. I have some cows and steers at home, and I do sell calves occasionally. And I put an ad on Craigslist, and a guy was texting me interested in buying a calf. Well, he showed up at my farm and got out of his vehicle, and I immediately started feeling the biases that I have kind of be negative against this individual. He drove up in kind of a beater car, had super long hair, lots of tats. And these biases started about, well, I got to know this individual, and I've actually sold him multiple calves since. Great guy, super at raising calves. But I had to kind of set aside some of those biases that I had in order to do the business with this gentleman. I believe that on-farm interviews are the best. It may be tempting to pick a neutral location like a coffee shop or something like that, but I think that farm interviews have a lot of value. It lets the candidate see the work environment, but it also lets you see how that candidate reacts to the work environment. You know, if they seem very engaged and very interested in your farm and ask you questions about the farm, that is a great sign of a potential worker that will really fit in nicely, versus someone that seems kind of put off by the farm or not very engaged in the whole process. And that's something that you can kind of gauge as part of your interview. I would consider allowing some of your employees, part of your team, into the interview process. It can be helpful to have a second opinion sometimes, particularly if you have a team lead or a supervisor or someone on your farm whose opinion you really value. If you do this, though, I would encourage you to kind of coach them before the interview so that they stick to, I don't want to say stick to the script, but you know, not get off on things that maybe aren't appropriate or aren't relevant to the interview process, and the interview ends up going in a direction that you don't want it to. So spend some time, if you're going to pull somebody into the interview process, with them on what's going to happen and how things should play out. I would encourage you to ask behavioral questions. And behavioral questions are simply open-ended questions that hopefully get the candidate talking, versus closed-end questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no, or a shrug, or you know, a grunt, where you just don't get a whole lot of information. An example would be, instead of asking, can you drive a skid loader? When I ask someone, can you drive a skid loader, they could say yes, but that yes, does that mean you think you could drive a skid loader because you've driven other vehicles, or you're super, super comfortable driving a skid loader and you do it all the time? If you rephrase the question into a behavioral format by saying, tell me about a time when you used a skid loader to complete a job, you hopefully will get them talking, and they'll give you more information about that skill set. And you'll be able to tell from their answer whether they are a very occasional skid steer operator, or it's something that they're very, very comfortable with, an expert level. Keep in mind that interviews are very, very painful experiences for introverts. Introverts really struggle with the whole interview concept. So you may have to try a time or two to get them talking and kind of get them comfortable, but behavioral questions are definitely a great tool to get things started. Maybe wondering about, you know, what are the questions that I'm okay to ask and what questions should I not ask? There are certain categories, if you will, that are considered protected information. And while lawsuits of discrimination from the EEOC against farm employees are rare, it can happen. So I would encourage you to just avoid those questions altogether and just not even go there, but rather rephrase them to something that you can actually ask. So for example, do not ask anything that is related to marital status, reproductive status, sexual preferences. Anything like that is off limits in a job interview. So you can't ask a candidate, are you single, engaged, married? Do you have kids? Are you planning to have kids? Are you pregnant? Are you planning to get pregnant? But what you can ask, which is totally safe and hopefully gets at that information that you're trying to ask, is you could say, we start at 5 a.m. Are you able to work at that time? Have you had experience with early starts? How did you handle that? And that will hopefully provide you that information that you needed without asking them anything that violates their rights. You can't ask questions about how old the candidate is. So for example, you should avoid questions about when did you graduate from school, which is a roundabout way of asking them how old they are. Or on the other end of the generations, when are you thinking about retiring? But what you can ask is what are your career goals? And that will hopefully get people to open up and tell you, if they're just looking for a seasonal position for a few months, or if they're going to college in the fall, without actually asking them, kind of what age group they end up in. There is one important exception to this question about age. And there is a time when you can and should ask how old a job candidate is, and that is when you're hiring minor children. So if you are hiring young people on your farm and they happen to be less than 16 years old, you do have to ask how old they are and when their birthday is, because that may restrict the hours that they work or certain tasks that they may perform on your farm. So that is the one exception on the age question. You can't ask anything that violates the person's privacy when it comes to ethnicity or country of origin. So you can't say, where is your family from, or where were you born? But you can absolutely and should ask, are you authorized to work in the United States? And that's a totally legit question to ask. And then another category is religious preferences. So you should not ask job candidates, do you go to church? What's your religious background? But you absolutely can ask them, if you are selected, can you work weekends and holidays? So, that's kind of another way of getting at the information that you were trying to get at in the first place. And like I said, when you include other people in your interview process, if you have a supervisor or a hired person that leads your farm, make sure that they're coached on these questions as well. So that's always a good idea. Interview tips. Here's some things that just based on before I joined Extension, I spent many, many years as an HR director for an ag supplier. So I've been involved in countless interviews, and here's some tips that I would recommend. Have a list of questions prepared. Make sure that you're asking every candidate the same questions, that you're not just kind of winging it off the cuff, and that you're asking consistent questions to all of your job seekers. You will have interviews that don't go so well. You will have interviews that you can tell in the first few minutes of the interview that this isn't someone that you would probably pursue for an employment opportunity. But I would encourage you, it's important to continue through the whole process, or at least close to the whole process, so that person doesn't feel dismissed or that they don't have a positive experience. Because the thing is, even for job candidates that you, for whatever reason, don't select, you don't know who else they know. And the word will get out that they had a bad experience interviewing for a job, and you would not want that to reflect negatively on future job seekers. Follow the 80-20 rule. So what I mean by that is you will not be able to cover during the course of a typical job interview every single aspect of every single job on your farm. Just hit the high points. Don't worry about the other duties as assigned that may come up infrequently, but just focus on the primary expectations that you have as an employer and that you would expect people to meet in order to succeed in a role on your farm. And then watch for some red flags. And these are some red flags that may come up during your interview process that you as an employer should be aware of. Lack of eye contact. This is one that ideally in a perfect interview, the person is very engaged. They want to get to know you. They answer the questions that you pose to them honestly, and they look you in the eye. Be a little bit careful with this one because there are cultural differences. So for example, some cultures, particularly Southeast Asian cultures, it's considered rude to look someone directly in the eye. So, don't sweat this detail too much, but for many of your job interviews, eye contact is certainly a positive thing. Be cautious of suspicious work history. And what I would describe as suspicious work history is if you have a chemical engineer applying for one of your hourly farm jobs, that should cause you to pause for a moment and think, wonder why this chemical engineer is wanting to work for an hourly wage on my farm. And there could be compelling reasons for that, but it is something to at least kind of wonder about a little bit. Lack of specific work examples. So what I mean by this is where someone has told you that they've done this and this and this in their employment history, but they can't come up with any examples. People do fabricate resumes. People do make up stuff on job applications. So this is kind of cause for concern when they can't come up with any specific examples or of where they've worked or what they've done. No questions about the job or the farm. This to me is a red flag. You want your ideal job candidate to be very inquisitive about what your farm does, what kind of jobs people have, what people potentially could aspire to on your job. So if there's a career path that people maybe join your farm entry level, but they move into other roles, it's great to have the person. Now, again, remember that introverts really struggle with this. They're going to be super nervous and they may struggle to come up with a question, but ideally they'll do as much talking or hopefully as much talking as you do. Unexplained gaps in employment. There may be huge chronological gaps in someone's resume or job application. There can be compelling reasons for that. Maybe they're spending time with their family or going back to school or various reasons that there could be gaps in employment, but it's definitely something you'd want to look into a little bit. Leaving jobs due to disagreements. This is something that tends to follow people from job to job to job. So if a job seeker seems to have difficulty getting along with others, you may find that translates to your farm as well. Job hopping, while it's not uncommon, especially in this type of a job market, if you have a job applicant who's had 3 jobs in the last month, that is definitely cause for concern, and maybe somebody you want to maybe not pursue as aggressively as other candidates who have a more promising job history. And then last but not least would be gossiping about former managers or employees. If a job candidate during the course of the interview tells you that their last employer was a total butthead, maybe they were, and difficult bosses are very real and they do exist, but it is a bit of a red flag because, you could quickly become that person's next butthead. So, just be concerned about someone who shares a whole lot of information about former employees or former managers who they could not get along with for whatever reason. That's just a few ideas. I would, just like as you're moving to the next step, it's important to let the candidate know what that next step is. So for example, if you do second interviews on your farm, or maybe there's a partner or a key employee that wasn't there on the day of their interview and you want to make sure that they meet them before you move forward, let them know that. Let them know that there's another step in the process. If you plan to make a decision, within the next week, let them know that. Don't lock yourself into a super specific time frame because things will come up, but do try to give viable job candidates a good idea of what to expect next. Evaluate the available candidates. So if you have multiple candidates that you've interviewed, try to rack and stack them in your mind. Pros and cons, kind of weigh who would be the best person based on the fit and the role on your farm. Remember that the perfect candidate probably doesn't exist. And so you may have to kind of go back and forth between candidates that you think, are closest. When you have a tiebreaker to make, I would encourage you to hire for attitude and train for skill. So, and what I mean by that is someone who is willing and positive and has a upbeat attitude about learning the tasks on your farm can be a way more compelling candidate than somebody who has lots and lots of experience, but a super crabby attitude and a challenging personality to work with. Check references if you can. It's not always easy to do this step, but I would encourage you to check references. The best references are previous supervisors. Everybody has an Aunt Betty that loves them, so don't call Aunt Betty for a job reference. Try to get to former bosses where it's possible. HR tends to be a terrible reference because they've been trained what not to say. So if you can get to previous supervisors, that's definitely your best bet when checking references. And then make the offer. I would encourage you to make your initial offers verbally. So call the person up, talk to them face to face, however you want to do it. Make the job offer verbally before you put it in writing. Try to get some level of acceptance from that person. And I would really encourage you to get an accepted offer before you dismiss your also rans. So if you have, say, 3 people that you're selecting from, make sure that you've landed the position before you tell the other 2 that they weren't selected, because if that first person declines for whatever reason, it's super embarrassing to go back to those people that you rejected and say, oh, by the way, that job that I turned you down for, you still interested? It just isn't a great way to start employment on your farm. It happens. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but try to avoid that if you can. When you get to the written offer stage, do put it in writing, put your expectations in as far as start date and hourly wage and anything else that you feel is compelling for the employment situation. Regarding what's compelling to an employment situation, I would encourage you to consider the concept of total comp. And what I mean by that is, so workers, particularly hourly wage workers, are very, very focused on the wage. They want to know, how much am I going to make per hour? But in many employment situations, that total compensation experience can be much broader than just the hourly wage. You may even want to consider putting together a compensation statement. And what a compensation statement does is it outlines the total package that an employee on your farm would receive. And that could include annualized wages, overtime pay if you pay overtime. If you have paid vacations, include that as well. Some farms use bonuses, as maybe as a product quality bonus. So make sure that you mention that as well. Any mandated federal benefits that you have to pay. I mean, granted, you don't have a way of not paying these, but still, it's part of what you're committing to employees, like workers' comp and Social Security. If you offer insurance plans on your farm, make sure that you put an estimated value of those. Any employee use of farm computers, printers, internet, it all adds up. So try to put a guesstimate together of the value of that and make employees aware of what that might entail. The value of any farm issued cell phones, if you use those, or pagers, or any other technology that you're providing to the employee for use when they're on your farm. Some farms provide meals or snacks or drinks. Make sure you make an attempt to include the value of those as well. If there's a van pickup service or use of a farm truck available to employees, that has value. Any professional development, training opportunities that you might provide for employees, definitely include that. And then any other employee perks. And those could be things like produce or a turkey at Thanksgiving, anything else that you do for your employees that become valuable to them as part of the whole package when they're considering not only whether to choose you as an employer, but as a retention tool as well. When you hire new people on your farm, it's a great time to consider the new hire experience. And what I mean by that is, what's it like to join your farm? What does it feel like? Is it a very welcoming environment? Is it yay, the new workers are here type of a feel? Or are people kind of pull back and suspicious and just really evaluate that whole onboarding feel and what that might feel like to a new person? Are you giving them the tools that they need to succeed? Are you explaining how and why you do things on your farm and providing them the training that they need to succeed in the job? We're finding that more and more people that are gravitating towards farms as potential places of employment may not have farm experience. So it's really on you as the employer to make sure that they're fully trained and functioning as they join your team. You might want to consider mentoring, which is simply partnering the new hire up with someone more experienced who knows the ins and outs. It's not a boss subordinate type of a relationship, but more of a friend, mentor, guide. If you choose mentors on your farm, be very picky about who you choose as a mentor, because you don't want somebody who is super crabby and jaded and kind of like spoils the whole new hire experience. You want someone who's really positive and upbeat and willing to help out these new hires to succeed. And then as you're onboarding new people, please keep in mind the 3 things that every employee wants to know. And these are 3 things, regardless of the job, regardless of the level of experience, that everybody, all of us as employees want to know. What is expected of me? How am I doing? And why am I important? And this last one is the one that gets forgotten the most. Why am I important? Everybody wants to feel valued. They want to feel like what they're doing matters. And so it's important that you as an employer take the time, not all the time or every day, but to remind people of why they matter to the performance and productivity of your farm. It all ties into your business culture, and we've talked in some of our other webinars about the workplace culture. It basically is a competitive advantage. So in a super tight job market like we're faced with, your workplace culture, how you treat people, the experience that they have on your farm can become a competitive advantage that differentiates you not only from other farms, but other employers in your area. It can be a great way of attracting talent by having a very positive workplace culture. And it's even more important for lower wage jobs because it becomes a bigger deal that the employee experience, the culture, how people are treated becomes huge. And then every farm has a culture. I remember a conversation that I had with a farm manager. It was actually on a dairy farm, and I was explaining to him the value of workplace culture. And he said, yeah, we don't really do that here. And I'm like, yeah, actually you do. You may not be doing it intentionally. It may not be the culture that you desire to have, but there's a culture and your employees are certainly aware of it. So be a smart farm manager and kind of define what your culture should be and what you want it to be, rather than just leave it to random chance. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the connection with safety, because all these things are interconnected. So think of HR as a system, not as a one-off. And if you're really putting your efforts into recruiting, retention, employee engagement, high levels of morale, safety will just come naturally. It just becomes part of the fabric of who you are as an employer. So that is my wrap up. I would encourage you, if you haven't before, please visit our Farm Management Topic Hub. It is a website where we have a drop-down menu of all kinds of HR information, safety information, great tips for developing job descriptions or running an interview. I hope that you will consider that as a resource. Again, my name is Jim Versweyveld. I hope that as you have HR questions, either today or in the future, that you'll reach out to me. My email and phone number is listed there as well. And Allison's happy to get a hold of me as well if you misplace this contact information. But that's my presentation for today. Are there questions that I can help with today?
And as always, I am happy to ask questions either if they're typed into the chat broadly, or if you want a question asked anonymously, you can use that drop down and choose to send the question just to me, and I will ask it anonymously on your behalf. Until that time, or as we're waiting for other questions to come in, Jim, some of the growers that I've been talking with are curious about hiring people from other countries. Do you know anything, or is there resources within University of Wisconsin on how to set up work visas if people are interested in those?
Not exactly through extension, but there is through DATCAP. So the Department of Agriculture, Consumer Trade and Protection, they do have a resource. It's part of their farm center, and they can help people kind of navigate through that process. I'm not going to say it's an easy process because it's challenging. Some farms, depending on their size, actually hire attorneys to help them navigate through this work visa process. So it is cumbersome. One way to work, I don't want to say work around it, but one possible solution to that is to go through an employment agency where they are the employer of record, and then you don't have to deal with any of the work visas. Now, you will pay a little bit more per hour for those individuals because you're basically paying their wage plus a fee to the agency, but then at least it has all that nightmare of paperwork off your plate. Plus, if the employee doesn't work out, it's actually easier to separate them if they're an agency worker rather than your own employee that you've sponsored through a work visa. So just something to consider.
And that actually dovetails really nicely into the next question that I got in through the chat. Do you recommend a probationary period for new employees? And if so, what are the best practices for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. First off, it's not a bad practice, but I would avoid calling it probationary, because probationary feels kind of like, ooh, I did something wrong, I'm on probation. I would call it an introductory period or a get to know us period. But I would avoid the word probationary just because it sounds like, you did something evil. But I would say that it's not uncommon, and whether it's 30 days or whatever you think makes sense for your farm. Usually what happens is you get to know them, they get to know you. Sometimes it's just a mutually agreeable separation within that time, kind of no harm, no foul. Obviously, you're paying that person during their introductory period, but sometimes benefits don't kick in until after that introductory period is completed.
Thank you. I've got another question in the chat. Do you recommend having a thorough employee manual or employee handbook for both full-time and part-time employees? Follow-up to that is, do you have an idea what percentage of farms? Actually, I'll ask those two separately. So answer the first one on, do you like to have that thorough employee handbook for both full-time and part-time?
Yep. So the answer is yes, but I would keep the sections separate. So, and what I mean by that is typically you have different benefits for your full-time team than you do for your part-time team. So you don't want your part-time employees to read all through the things that they're not eligible for and feel kind of second class. So I would keep them as, they can be in the same binder, but as two separate sections so that your part-timers see your part-time employee guidelines and your full-timers see the full-time, so that people aren't forced arbitrarily into like kind of classes, if you will.
And then the second half of the question, do you have any idea what percentage of farms offer health insurance as a benefit? And what is the premium share? What percent does the employee pay versus what percent does the employer pay? And I guess that's probably, we're asking that across all agriculture, if you've got those numbers.
Yeah, I don't know that exact number. It's relatively low. Where we see it most often is very large farms. Very large farms often will offer, whether it's medical, dental, vision, whatever, health premiums they're covering. It always is a cost share, so it's not fully funded by the employer. You always ask. I don't know the exact percentages, and I do know that the percentages of medium and small size farms that offer those benefits is quite low. What those farms can do, though, is they can point their employees towards resources that can get them the insurance that they need. So while it may not be funded by the employer, they can give them a leg up, and that can be through local agencies, the job center, places like that can help navigate that.
And then another question, do other ag industries openly share general farm job descriptions along with a pay scale matrix?
Great question. Job descriptions are fairly easy to get your hands on. It's not too difficult. Pay structures are more challenging because, it is a competitive bit out there. Employers often don't publish their wage scales. So, they have them certainly, but it's kept more as a behind the scenes document. So a lot of determining kind of where you need to be competitively wage wise really depends on your local market. And what I mean by your local market is if your neighboring town has a Dollar General warehouse that's starting people at $15 an hour, you're going to have a hard time not having that impact your starting wage in some degree. I'm not saying that you have to be at 15, but if you're not, you have to have something attractive about working there that the local employer does not. So it's a good idea to know what other farms in your area are paying, and then also, significant employers within your community. That it's helpful information to know as well.
And a follow-up question to that, and probably getting into our last couple questions, it's 2 minutes till the end of the hour. So, and the other questions, go ahead and type them in. When we think of recruiting, how does our industry know if we're in line with one another for apples to apples comparisons?
I guess I'm not exactly sure what the question. What is the question exactly?
How, and maybe I'll ask it analogously in the dairy industry, even if you know more about that. How common is it for dairy employers, for example, to talk amongst each other to find out what a standard compensation package is?
Very common. Very common. You can sometimes, with industry groups, with local community members, definitely it's a great topic. Many employers will share at least what they're starting people at. They may not talk about, what some of their leader positions are being paid, but as far as their entry-level positions, yeah, I would say grower associations can be a resource for that as well, just to kind of get a ballpark of where you fit in. And benefit offerings are a good question to ask as well. If everybody in your community has a robust benefit offering, that may force you as an employer to kind of rethink what your offering to your employees as well.
Fantastic. We have rounded up into 1 o'clock. And so I want to thank you very much, Jim, for all of the insight you've shared with us today. And also for the offer that our growers can contact you when they have got further questions, either on finding people to get into that interviewing pipeline, questions on interviewing, questions on making offers, or determining total compensation packages. I'm really grateful to have you as a resource. And I guess I want to thank all of the growers for that were able to join us today for joining. And we will be rebroadcasting this on Friday at our normal time at noon. So if you have friends who missed this session who want to attend, go ahead and remind them to come to that. And I will thank everyone and let you all get on out to the rest of your sanding today.